Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you powerful tales of love, betrayal, and justice. Today's story follows young Emily Lexington, a girl caught in a web of lies spun by her own mother. When her beloved governess, Evelyn, is falsely accused of theft, Emily must find the courage to uncover the truth. As secrets unravel, shocking revelations shake the foundations of the Lexington family. Will justice prevail? Will love triumph over deceit? Stay with us to find out. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with Life Stories. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the grand Lexington estate, mixing with the delicate aroma of vanilla-scented pastries. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the kitchen, casting golden streaks across the marble countertops. Evelyn moved with practiced ease, her hands steady as she arranged a breakfast tray with precise care. Though she had worked in the Lexington household for nearly 2 decades, she never took these moments for granted. Her crisp white apron stood in sharp contrast to her deep navy blue dress, a familiar uniform that had become a second skin. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, a style she had maintained for years, practical, understated. Just like her presence in the house, she was a part of the background. Yet to one person in the household, she was everything. "Emily, my love," she called gently, setting a mug of hot chocolate on the table, carefully decorated with tiny marshmallows, just as the little girl liked it. "Come have your drink before it gets cold." From the hallway, a small figure darted in, her honey-colored hair tousled from sleep. Emily, only 8 years old, still in her pajamas, ran straight into Evelyn's arms, pressing her warm cheek against the fabric of her apron. The love between them was effortless, a bond that had formed in the quiet corners of the house, in whispered stories before bedtime, in scraped knees Evelyn had tended to, in the moments when a mother's absence left space that only Evelyn seemed willing to fill. "Tell me the story of the enchanted prince again," Emily pleaded, climbing onto one of the chairs, her big blue eyes full of anticipation. Evelyn chuckled softly, pouring warm milk into a smaller cup for the girl. "Again? Haven't you heard it enough times to tell it to me instead?" "But I love the way you tell it," Emily said, swinging her legs beneath the table. "The way you do all the voices makes it feel real." Evelyn smiled as she began the tale, her voice weaving the familiar magic that always made the girl's eyes widen. For a few moments, the world was just the two of them, the warmth of the kitchen, the distant sound of birds outside, the gentle lilt of Evelyn's storytelling. Then, a shift in the air, a presence in the doorway. Victoria Lexington stood there, poised, as always, tall, blonde, with emerald green eyes that held a calculating sharpness. She was a woman who belonged in ballrooms and exclusive charity events, not in the simple warmth of a kitchen. Her lips, painted a deep red, pressed together as she took in the scene before her. The sight of her daughter wrapped in Evelyn's attention made something tighten in her expression. Evelyn felt the shift immediately, though she did not let it show. Years of working in this house had taught her how to read Victoria's moods, how to sense when a storm was brewing beneath her polished exterior. And today, there was something different, something more dangerous. The sharp click of Victoria's heels on the floor shattered the spell of their moment. "Emily," she said, her tone even but laced with quiet disapproval, "why are you still in the kitchen? Breakfast should be taken in the dining room, like a proper young lady." Emily hesitated, glancing up at Evelyn, unsure. Evelyn, ever the mediator, spoke gently. "She was just keeping me company for a little while. Mrs. Lexington. She enjoys a story in the mornings." Victoria's fingers tapped against the surface of the table, the large diamond on her ring catching the morning light. "I'm sure she does," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But she needs to learn where she belongs." The words stung, though Evelyn showed no reaction. Emily, however, frowned. "I like being here with Evelyn," she said, her small voice stubborn. She always makes my breakfast just the way I like it. Victoria exhaled sharply, smoothing down the sleeve of her silk robe. That's enough. Emily, go upstairs and get dressed. Your piano lesson starts in 20 minutes. There was a beat of silence before Emily obeyed, slipping off the chair and giving Evelyn's hand a quick squeeze before running off. The room was much quieter once she was gone. Victoria lingered, her presence heavy with something unspoken. She took a slow step forward, looking around the kitchen as if inspecting it for something out of place. Evelyn resumed her work, placing a dish of warm rolls on a tray, moving with a steady efficiency that had never failed her before. Breakfast is served in the dining room. Mrs. Lexington, she said carefully. I've prepared the pastries Mr. Henry enjoys. Victoria tilted her head, watching her with a gaze that felt intrusive. Evelyn, she said finally, after breakfast, I want you to organize my closet, especially the jewelry section. Something in her tone made Evelyn's stomach tighten. She did not falter, but she felt the warning in those words. I noticed some irregularities, Victoria added, her voice light, casual, but her eyes sharp. Evelyn's fingers curled slightly around the dish she was holding. For the first time in all her years of service, she felt something more than unease in the presence of Victoria Lexington. She felt fear. Yet she did what she had always done, she nodded. Professional and composed. Of course. Mrs. Lexington. I'll tend to it as soon as I finish tidying up the kitchen. Victoria lingered for a moment longer, as if searching for something in Evelyn's expression. Then, satisfied, she turned and left, her perfume trailing behind her. Evelyn exhaled softly, her hands tightening on the edge of the counter. She had spent 20 years in this house, learning its rules, its rhythms, its quiet secrets. But something had shifted today. Something was about to change. And in the depths of her heart, she had the terrible feeling that whatever was coming next would shatter everything she had built in this home. Evelyn had spent years learning how to control her emotions, how to move through the Lexington house with quiet grace. But as she climbed the grand staircase toward Victoria's bedroom, she felt an unshakable unease creeping into her chest. Victoria had never been subtle about her disdain for the bond between Evelyn and Emily. But today's request felt different. There had been something deliberate in her voice. Something planned. The air inside Victoria's bedroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume. A suffocating floral aroma that clung to every fabric and surface. The vanity, adorned with rows of sleek perfume bottles and gilded jewelry boxes, gleamed under the soft afternoon light. Evelyn moved to the closet, where Victoria's jewelry collection was kept in a tall, custom-built cabinet. She had cleaned and organized this space countless times before. Every necklace, every brooch, every velvet-lined drawer. She knew exactly where each piece belonged. So when she pulled open the first drawer and saw a space where a watch should have been, a chill ran down her spine. She hesitated for just a moment, then reached for the next drawer. A pair of earrings was missing. A gold bracelet she had polished the week before, gone. Evelyn inhaled sharply. No. The realization settled over her like a suffocating weight. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't a mistake. This was a trap. The door to the bedroom swung open behind her. She turned just in time to see Victoria step inside. Her expression unreadable, yet triumphant. Finished already? Victoria asked, her voice too casual. Evelyn straightened, keeping her posture poised despite the storm rising inside her. Mrs. Lexington. Where is my watch? Evelyn? The question sliced through the air, cutting away any pretense of civility. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. I don't know, she said carefully. I just noticed. I know exactly where it is. Victoria strode across the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Before Evelyn could process what was happening, Victoria reached for her handbag, Evelyn's handbag hanging discreetly on a hook near the door. The world seemed to slow as Victoria opened it, rummaging through its contents with the air of someone already knowing what they would find. And then, a glint of gold. Victoria's fingers closed around the missing watch, pulling it free for all to see. Evelyn stared at it, her mind whirring, trying to make sense of the impossible. No, this wasn't real. Her pulse pounded in her ears as Victoria held up the watch, her eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. So she said, her voice dripping with feigned disappointment. "Are you still going to deny it?" Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came. This wasn't just an accusation. This was a carefully orchestrated downfall. And before she could even attempt to defend herself, a new sound filled the room, the shrill ring of a telephone. Victoria smiled. Slow and cold. That must be them. The police. Evelyn felt the world tilt beneath her. She turned toward the door. And there, in the hallway, stood Emily. The little girl's wide eyes darted between her mother and Evelyn, confusion and terror written across her delicate features. "Mom!" Emily's voice trembled. "What's happening?" Victoria's expression softened instantly, transforming into something almost sympathetic as she crouched to Emily's level. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "I know this is hard to understand. But sometimes, people aren't who we think they are." Evelyn's heart twisted. Emily shook her head violently. "No. Evelyn wouldn't, she would never." Victoria sighed, placing a delicate hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I wish that were true, darling. But I found my missing jewelry in her bag." She gestured toward the watch. "What other explanation is there?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she turned to Evelyn. "Tell her," she pleaded. "Tell her it's not true." Evelyn's throat was dry. "This is a mistake," she whispered, finally finding her voice. "Emily, I swear to you, I didn't take anything." Emily looked at her mother, then back at Evelyn, struggling to process it all. Downstairs, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent a fresh wave of dread through Evelyn's body. Moments later, footsteps echoed through the house. Male voices, firm and professional. The police had arrived. Victoria straightened, her mask of calm authority slipping back into place. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," she said, though there was no sorrow in her voice. "But you leave me no choice." Two uniformed officers stepped into the room. One of them cleared his throat. "Evelyn Carter?" Evelyn forced herself to meet his gaze. "Yes. You're under arrest for grand larceny." The words barely registered as one of the officers stepped forward, taking hold of her arm. Emily let out a strangled cry. "No. Stop. She didn't do anything." Victoria held her daughter back, whispering soothing reassurances. Her performance flawless. Evelyn barely felt the cold metal as handcuffs locked around her wrists. This house, the place she had given 20 years of her life to, was no longer her home. As she was led toward the door, her gaze met Emily's one last time. The little girl's face was streaked with tears, her small fists clenched. "Evelyn," she sobbed. "Please don't go." Evelyn held her head high, even as her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Because in that moment, she knew the truth. Victoria had won. The cold metal of the handcuffs dug into Evelyn's wrists as she sat in the back of the police car, the once familiar streets of the Lexington estate fading behind her. The reality of what had just happened had not yet settled in. The accusations, the betrayal, the terrified look on Emily's face, it all played in her mind like a broken record. The ride to the police station felt endless, yet too fast at the same time. The officer beside her remained silent, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Evelyn wanted to scream, to demand justice, to tell them that this was all a cruel setup, but who would believe her? By the time she was processed and led into a holding cell, exhaustion had overtaken her. She was stripped of her belongings, forced into a dull orange jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and hopelessness. Her world, once polished and orderly, had been reduced to this. The following days passed in a blur of harsh fluorescent lights. cold concrete walls, and the ceaseless murmurs of other inmates. At first, she had clung to the belief that this was all a mistake, that the Lexingtons, Henry, at least, would realize what had happened and set things right. But days turned into weeks, and no one came, except for her family. Evelyn's heart clenched the moment she saw them enter the visitation room. Her sister, Coraline, looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. Everett, her brother-in-law, carried an unreadable expression, his movements stiff and careful, as if he wasn't sure how to act. And then there was Isolde, her niece, whose usual bright energy was dulled by something deeper, shame, perhaps. Evelyn forced a smile as she picked up the phone through the plexiglass. But the moment Coraline's trembling voice filled her ears, the mask cracked. "My God. Evelyn, what have they done to you?" Evelyn opened her mouth, ready to tell them everything, to beg them to believe her. But before she could, Everett spoke, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Evelyn, we need to know the truth." She flinched. They didn't believe her. She had spent her life building her reputation, dedicating herself to the Lexington family, raising Emily as if she were her own. And yet, when it mattered most, the people she loved weren't standing by her side. Coraline slid a folded newspaper against the glass. With hesitant fingers, Evelyn picked it up. "Lexington family betrayed, housekeeper steals millions in jewels." Her heart clenched. The article was filled with Victoria's words, how she had placed unwavering trust in Evelyn, how she had treated her like family, only to be deceived. It painted Evelyn as an opportunist, someone who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. The world believed Victoria. Coraline's voice was raw. "Evelyn, if you needed money, why didn't you come to us?" Tears burned at Evelyn's eyes. "You think I did this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Everett's expression darkened. "The evidence is overwhelming. The jewelry was in your bag. There were deposits in your account, small amounts, but steady. Phone records linking you to pawn shops." Evelyn's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. Your lawyer said you should take the plea deal." Everett continued. "Confess. Return the rest of the jewels, and they'll reduce your sentence." Her hands clenched into fists. "There are no rest of the jewels because I never took them." A silence hung heavy between them. Coraline's lips trembled, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the table. "I don't know what to believe anymore." That broke her. Of all the betrayals, this one hurt the most. "Please," she said desperately. "You know me." But Coraline only shook her head, eyes filled with doubt. Everett stood, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder. "Think hard about what you're doing, Evelyn. Your family is being torn apart because of this." The guard signaled the end of visitation. Evelyn wanted to scream, to reach through the glass and make them see the truth. But as they stood, she saw it in their eyes. They were already gone. As they walked away, Coraline whispered one last plea. "Come back to us, Evelyn. Whatever the truth is, it can't be worse than losing you." And then they were gone. Evelyn sat frozen in place, her breath shaking, the newspaper still clenched in her hands. She had lost everything. And outside, beyond the cold walls of the prison, the real thief still walked free. Emily sat curled up on Evelyn's bed, clutching her governess's old apron like a lifeline. The room, once filled with warmth and stories, now felt cold and lifeless. The beige curtains still swayed gently in the evening breeze, carrying the faint scent of the garden that Evelyn had loved to tend. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she whispered, "Why aren't you here, Evelyn?" Downstairs, the Lexington mansion was anything but quiet. The sharp, clipped tones of her mother's voice carried through the hallways, speaking in hushed but urgent whispers. Her father's deeper voice occasionally interrupted, but he never seemed to match Victoria's intensity. Emily wiped her tears and crept to the top of the staircase, peering down at the entrance hall. Her father, Henry Lexington stood with his arms crossed, his face tense. Across from him, 2 police officers loomed over her older brother, Gabriel. Gabriel looked bored, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his expensive coat. The dark splatters of paint on his clothes stood out starkly against the pristine marble floor. "This is the 3rd time this year," one of the officers said. "Vandalizing public property is no small matter. Mr. Lexington." Henry ran a hand down his face, sighing deeply. "We'll cover the damages. Of course. There's no need to escalate this further." Victoria stepped forward, a tense smile on her lips. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "Gabriel is a teenager. He makes mistakes. We'll ensure this doesn't happen again." Gabriel scoffed. "Not like it matters. Everyone already forgot about Evelyn's case. Who cares about some stupid wall?" Emily felt her stomach twist at the casual way he spoke about Evelyn, as if she had been nothing more than a passing inconvenience. Henry's jaw tightened. "That's enough. Gabriel." The officers handed over some paperwork. "You're lucky, Mr. Lexington. Given your family's standing, the charges won't be pressed. But next time, we may not be so lenient." As the officers left, Victoria turned on Gabriel, her eyes flashing. "You're becoming a liability." Gabriel rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. Don't act like you care. You're just mad because this is bad press." Victoria's lips thinned. "Pack your bags. You're leaving for boarding school in the morning." For the first time, Gabriel seemed genuinely caught off guard. "What? You heard me," Victoria said coolly. "It's already arranged." Gabriel clenched his fists. "You're just trying to get rid of me. Just like you got rid of Evelyn." The words hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. Henry's face darkened. "Gabriel." But Victoria placed a hand on her husband's arm, silencing him. She turned back to her son, lowering her voice. "You knew the rules. I kept my end of the bargain. Now it's time for you to do yours." Emily's heart pounded. "What bargain?" Gabriel glared at his mother but said nothing. Instead, he turned on his heel and stomped up the stairs, brushing past Emily without a second glance. Emily stood frozen, trying to piece everything together. Her mother had always been distant, but in recent weeks, she had been different, more secretive, more careful. And now, Gabriel was being sent away, just like that. Something wasn't right. She tiptoed back to Evelyn's room and sat on the bed, hugging the apron close. As she did, her gaze landed on the bedside table. A book. One of the storybooks Evelyn had always read to her. But something was different. A small piece of paper stuck out between the pages. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for it. Could Evelyn have left something behind? A message? A clue? Her breath caught as she unfolded the paper. It wasn't just a note. It was a receipt. A pawnshop receipt, dated weeks before Evelyn's arrest. And at the bottom, her mother's signature. Emily's blood ran cold. Her mother had lied. And Evelyn had been telling the truth all along. Emily sat frozen on Evelyn's bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The receipt trembled in her hands. It was undeniable, her mother had sold jewelry before Evelyn was even accused. Then why was Evelyn in prison? She clenched the paper tighter, staring at the neat, elegant signature at the bottom. Victoria Lexington. The sound of footsteps in the hallway sent a jolt of panic through her. She scrambled to tuck the receipt back between the pages of the book just as Gabriel's bedroom door swung open. Her brother barely glanced at her as he walked past. "Still sulking over your precious nanny," he muttered. Emily glared at him. "She didn't do it." Gabriel let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think that changes anything?" He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. "Wake up, Emily. The world isn't a fairy tale. People don't care about the truth. They care about who has the power to control it." Emily clenched her fists. "You know something, Don't you? Gabriel smirked. I know that you're asking dangerous questions. Emily's breath hitched. Gabriel's gaze flickered toward the door. Then back to her. Be careful. Little sister. Mom doesn't like when people get too curious. With that, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Emily alone with her racing thoughts. What did he mean? She gritted her teeth, determination flaring in her chest. If Gabriel knew something, then she had to find out what. And if her mother had framed Evelyn, she had to prove it. That night, she waited until the house was quiet. Then, with careful, silent steps, she slipped out of her room. Her heart pounded as she made her way down the hall toward her parents' bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, the dim glow of a bedside lamp casting soft shadows inside. She peeked through the crack, holding her breath. Victoria sat at the vanity, a silk robe draped over her shoulders, her blonde hair cascading in perfect waves. In front of her, laid out on the polished surface, were small velvet jewelry boxes. Emily's stomach twisted. Her mother hadn't stopped wearing expensive jewelry, despite claiming they were stolen. So where were these coming from? Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number. Emily strained to listen. Yes. I already took care of it, her mother murmured, her voice low and controlled. Gabriel leaves tomorrow, and Evelyn is still keeping her mouth shut. Everything is going according to plan. Emily's pulse spiked. A long pause. Then, no. Henry suspects nothing. He's too busy worrying about the business. And Emily, she's just a child. Emily bit her lip to keep from gasping. The conversation continued. Her mother's voice calm, methodical. The next pieces are already set aside. Once they're sold, we can cover the losses without Henry ever finding out. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in Emily's mind. Her mother had debts. She had been selling jewelry to cover them. Evelyn must have found out, and that's why she had been framed. Emily swallowed hard, stepping back from the doorway. She had the receipt. She had heard enough. But what could she do? She was just a child. And she was alone in a house full of lies. Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn's face, kind, patient, and now trapped behind prison bars for a crime she didn't commit. The weight of the truth pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Her mother had done this. Gabriel knew more than he let on. And Evelyn was suffering because of their secrets. By the time the first rays of morning sunlight filtered through her bedroom window, Emily had made up her mind. She needed proof. Real proof. She clenched the receipt in her small hand. It was something. But it wasn't enough. Her mother could lie her way out of a single piece of paper. But what if there was more? Her fingers brushed against her pocket, where an old phone rested, the one Gabriel had discarded when he got a new one. A plan began to form. The mansion was always busiest in the mornings. Maids bustled about, preparing breakfast. The air smelled of fresh coffee and buttered toast. Her father was already in his office, distracted by phone calls. And Victoria was still in bed. Perfect. Emily hurried down the hallway to her parents' bedroom. Her heart pounded as she reached for the doorknob. The room was empty. She slipped inside, moving quickly toward the vanity. Her hands trembled as she picked up the artificial flower arrangement on the table, adjusting the petals until the small phone camera was hidden inside. With careful precision, she set it to record. Then she stepped back, her breath shallow. If her mother really was the one behind all this, she would eventually slip up. She would talk. And when she did, Emily would have proof. The day crawled by painfully slow. Emily went through the motions, ate breakfast, nodded when spoken to, even played in the garden as her mother watched from the terrace. But inside, she was counting the hours, waiting. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She had learned her mother's routine over the years. Victoria always made one last round of the house before bed, checking the doors, dimming the lights, Then, when the house was quiet, she would retreat to her bedroom. Emily had to be patient. Finally, around 10 o'clock, she heard the soft click of her parents' bedroom door closing. She waited. Minutes passed like hours. Then she slipped out of bed, barefoot, creeping down the hall. The moment she stepped into the room, her pulse spiked. Victoria was already on the phone. Her back to the door, Emily darted to the vanity, reached into the flowers, and grabbed the phone. She clutched it to her chest, barely daring to breathe, then turned and rushed out, her heart racing so hard it hurt. Once back in her room, she dove under the covers and unlocked the screen. Her hands shook as she pressed play. The grainy video came to life. Victoria entered the room, her face calm, composed. She moved toward the vanity, opening a secret compartment in the drawer. Emily's breath hitched. Her mother pulled out a small bag full of jewelry. Then, as if that weren't enough, Victoria picked up the phone and spoke. With Gabriel at boarding school, no one will connect the dots. Emily's stomach twisted painfully. Then came the final blow. That idiot Evelyn is still holding firm, thinking she's protecting Emily. Little does she know, she's exactly where we wanted her. The screen blurred as tears filled Emily's eyes. Evelyn had been framed. Her mother had done this. And now Emily was the only one who could stop it. The courtroom was silent as Emily stepped forward, her small hands clutching the phone that held the truth. The judge had been moments away from sentencing Evelyn when she interrupted, her voice shaking but determined. "I have proof," she declared, her eyes locking onto Evelyn's tear-filled gaze. The video played for the entire court to see. Gasps filled the room as Victoria's own words condemned her. Henry Lexington's face paled as the weight of his wife's betrayal sank in. Within minutes, Evelyn's sentence was overturned. Victoria was arrested, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. As Evelyn stepped out of the courthouse, Emily ran into her arms. "You saved me, my love," Evelyn whispered. And Emily knew she had done the right thing. Subscribe to Life Stories for more powerful real-life tales of justice, love, and courage.